The Ukrainian armed forces are advancing against the enemy in what by Kremlin standards are giant strides. While Putin's army spends months fighting for every village, our defenders are achieving what seems impossible, recapturing as many as 3 Ukrainian villages from the Russian army in just one day. We're talking about the settlement of Sukitske and 2 more villages in the Pokrovsk direction, Kucherivyar and Uyut.
Thus, as of August 21st, 2025, the situation in this area has been stabilized. Control has been restored over 9 settlements. Another 9 have been cleared of enemy sabotage groups. In just the last 10 days, 1,756 enemy soldiers and 75 pieces of enemy equipment have been destroyed here.
The occupiers also suffered huge losses in their attempt to break through the Ukrainian front on a neighboring section of the front line. For example, the soldiers of the 33rd Brigade repelled a massive mechanized assault near Vladimirovka in the Donetsk region. During the battle, the weather conditions were poor, which did not work in the occupiers' favor. The enemy got at least 3 armored vehicles stuck in the swamp, and the infantry that began to disembark from them came under fire from artillery drones. At one point, even a HIMARS joined in to repel the Russian attack. As a result of the battle, the enemy lost 3 armored vehicles destroyed, 3 drowned, and most of their infantry was wiped out. Nevertheless, the Russian army does not give up hope of breaking through our defensive positions somewhere along the front at any cost, even if it means hundreds or thousands of their soldiers killed.
Every day, essentially, there are reports that the armed forces have driven the enemy out in one area or liberated territory in another. In all directions, they are basically repelling large-scale enemy attacks. Every day, dozens of attacks are carried out in various directions.
The enemy is especially desperate to push the Ukrainian armed forces out of Pokrovsk. Enemy sabotage groups have been storming the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces there around the clock non-stop for the past several days. The situation in this area remains extremely difficult for the Ukrainian armed forces. Nevertheless, despite all the enemy's efforts, our defenders are bravely holding the defense of Pokrovsk.
The defense of Pokrovsk has been holding for over a year now. Over a year, just think about that. So how many thousands of Russians have died there? Losses exceed 200,000. These are officially confirmed losses according to figures from foreign intelligence agencies. The second option, how much Russian equipment have Russian generals lost in this direction? The generals have lost their epaulets.
The Pokrovsk direction is the main topic of conversation for Russian propaganda. But when it comes to their so-called achievements on other parts of the front, Kremlin propaganda tries not to talk about it. On TV across the border, they're unlikely to show footage like this. Within minutes of detection, the border guards from the PLA reconnaissance strike group of the Guard Brigade utterly destroy yet another enemy position. As a result, the occupiers lost at least 2 of their tanks, a vehicle, an antenna, electronic warfare equipment, and a significant portion of their personnel in the southern Slobozhansky direction. Despite all their efforts, the Russians have not managed to achieve any significant victories either on the ground or in the air. The only thing the occupiers excel at is creating weapons of mass terror against civilians. A vivid example of this is the barbaric raid on wind turbines near Kramatorsk. These are clearly civilian critical infrastructure facilities. Thus, the Russians destroyed a 3rd wind power station in Kramatorsk. Before this, the occupiers attacked wind turbines on October 22nd and 24th. Endless air raids on Ukrainian cities may become the Kremlin's new tactic. To this end, Russia is actively testing more and more new types of its own drones. For example, UAVs with a ring wing. An unusual enemy drone was detected by a Ukrainian anti-aircraft drone. Its exact purpose has not yet been determined, but it is assumed that it could perform both reconnaissance and strike missions. Overall, just in the past week alone, the enemy sent at least 1,200 UAVs toward Ukraine, dropped more than 1,360 glide bombs, and used over 50 missiles of various types.
Every Russian strike is an attempt to inflict as much harm as possible on ordinary life. This week, these are strikes on residential buildings, on our people, on children, and on civilian infrastructure. This is the main target for the Russians. Thousands of strikes with different types of weapons in just 1 week.
However, the Ukrainian response to Russian terror is also not far off, military analysts assure.
Ukraine was, is, and will be. And sooner or later, Ukrainian Tomahawks will inevitably meet Russian decision-making centers.
And while the American Tomahawks are still on their way, the security service of Ukraine has shown off its own new acquisitions.
We are handing over this remarkable Magura B-7, which has already achieved a number of victories.
The drone was purchased with donations from Ukrainians as part of a large-scale fundraising campaign joined by local artists, influencers, and athletes.
This strike by a naval drone is the first in the world to have destroyed aerial targets.
Thanks to just one such naval drone, the occupiers can suffer colossal losses, which the Security Service of Ukraine promises to report to its closest allies. In their video reports,
the destruction of a Russian convoy in Zaporizhzhia. The Ukrainian flag is once again flying over Torsk. The counteroffensive in the east is yielding results. Near Pokrovsk, the occupiers are changing their tactics. Tanks in the Russian armed forces are now disposable. New details on the destruction of Russia's largest military factory and the Russian breakthrough in Kherson. TASS has been authorized to announce yet another fake. Everything happening on the front today, watch it right now. Ukrainian forces have thrown the Russians off track near Pokrovsk. Military analysts report that Moscow's plan to capture the city has failed, and it's all due to the incredible efforts of the defense forces in the Dobropilya area. It seems that Russia has realized there will be no further breakthrough in this direction. So they decided to abandon the encirclement tactic and return to classic frontal assaults.
Those Russian army units that were stationed in the southern and southwestern regions, who had been waiting for Pokrovsk to be fully encircled from the northern direction so that they could begin the process of tightening the ring around the city, ultimately ended up remaining in their positions without advancing. The Russian Army Command has apparently issued new orders instructing a return to direct frontal assaults on the city of Pokrovsk rather than waiting for the encirclement to be completed, largely from the south. Urban combat has already begun in Pokrovsk.
At the same time, despite increased activity in the southern part of the city, this hasn't brought the Russians any significant success. The number of attacks has also increased in another Donetsk direction, Kupiansk. However, the enemy is still unable to build up their forces there either. As a result, the only thing left for the saboteurs is to disguise themselves as civilians. And in this way, try to advance deeper into the settlement, essentially without any equipment.
There are, let's say, some positive trends regarding Kupiansk, because the defense forces are not allowing the Russians to establish, for example, those very crossings over the Oskil River. As a result, the Russians are currently unable to bring in more reserves, including mechanized components, which of course has made their actions in the city of Kupiansk much more difficult, although sabotage and reconnaissance groups are still attempting to disguise themselves as civilians. The Russians are present here. In
turn, experts link the Russians' activity in Donetsk region to a direct order from Putin to capture the region at any cost before the onset of cold weather. After all, the upcoming negotiations promise Moscow neither any territorial exchanges nor the voluntary surrender of the region.
The clear directive came not from Gerasimov, but from Putin, to urgently capture Pokrovsk, to seize Dobropilya and Kostiantynivka, and to have the prospect of fully conquering Donetsk region by winter. That is why the attacks currently underway are aimed at creating a strike force and breaking through the defenses.
Further confirmation that Ukraine does not intend to give up Donetsk region came from a statement by the separate assault regiment of the Ukrainian armed forces, Skelya. In particular, the soldiers showed how they were clearing the settlement of Torsky in the Lyman direction of occupiers. During the fighting, about 100 Russians who had holed up in abandoned houses were eliminated. Now the Ukrainian flag flies over Torska once again. The Zaporizhzhia direction also remains hot these days. There, the occupiers once again tried to break through the defensive line using dozens of heavy armored vehicles.
the enemy attempted to launch an attack with a mechanized column, deploying more than 30 pieces of heavy equipment. We're talking about Malatokmachka. This was, so to speak, the climax of this battle. Accordingly, the enemy was repelled there. Most of their equipment was destroyed even before reaching the actual line of combat engagement.
But even after such news, in the coming months, the Russians will not stop trying to use heavy equipment in assaults, experts explain. The thing is, small assault groups are no longer able to get through the AFU's kill zones. Motorcyclists don't work anymore either. Our FPV drone operators have learned to target these as well. The only option left is armor.
In Russia, they do this deliberately. They use tanks, MTLBs, and BMPs as disposable vehicles in their operations. As long as these armored vehicles can advance a few hundred meters, or ideally a kilometer or two if possible, or at the very least at least 100 meters, this is considered sufficient. The main goal is to allow the infantry to make a short, rapid dash and try to reach the areas where they are gathering.
But even knowing that they're being sent one way along with the vehicles, Russian assault troops obediently go on the breakthrough. As is once again confirmed, today the entire command model is tailored for this. Anyone who refuses is shot by their own side.
For us, it's still more or less okay, down below, further up at the front line. In general, if someone tries to run away, they're shot immediately. Even at first, when you've already become friends and he's the only one you were friends with, seem like the most normal guy. There's nowhere else to go. Either we get you or you get us. If you don't, you'll be wiped out, they'll wipe you out. That's how it is.
Russian propaganda is trying in any way it can to boost the morale of its boys a little. So on the eve, TASS made a loud statement that the Russian armed forces are already in Kherson. They were talking about how paratroopers landed in a remote area of the city called Korabel, but the fabrication didn't last even a day on the front page.
TASS ended up deleting the report about the successes of the Russian armed forces on Quarantine Island, where the Kherson district of Korabel is located. The publications of the state news agency stated that Russian troops had successfully landed on the island, taken control of key facilities, and repelled all attempts by the Ukrainian armed forces to counterattack. The reports were deleted, and
it seems that our special services have shown what it really means to operate effectively behind enemy lines. The destruction of the military plant in Kopeysk is linked by many analysts specifically to them, although the Ukrainian side has not yet provided any official confirmation. So far, it is known that 12 people have died at the facility and another 10 are still missing. Judging by satellite images, at least one of the workshops at the plastmass plant, which was involved in the production of ammunition, was destroyed as a result of the explosions.
the defense enterprise JSC plastmass plant manufactures a wide range of ammunition, including artillery shells, mortar shells, tank rounds, and unguided rockets. The enterprise underwent modernization, the construction of new workshops, and infrastructure expansion starting in 2023. And
it seems that, on the contrary, the Ukrainian armed forces will actually be getting more ammunition. The day before, a meeting of the coalition of the Resolute was held in London, with the main message being a significant increase in the supply of long-range weapons to Ukraine.
The wounded and maimed are being sent into assaults. Those soldiers deemed undesirable are simply eliminated, and if someone doesn't want to sign the contract, they'll end up signing it anyway. But the newly minted soldier only finds out about this after the fact. It's also nearly impossible to resign from the army. Even single fathers, who by law should be released without issue, are not granted discharge. Their children are simply placed in orphanages during this time.
According to single fathers interviewed by Verska, commanders may simply refuse to accept their resignation reports at first, denying discharge verbally. If the documents are accepted, they might get lost, but the soldiers continue to serve while their children temporarily stay with relatives or are placed in orphanages.
So it turns out that even with a living parent, the children are orphans. But really, what can be said about discharging a healthy man when even severely wounded soldiers aren't written off in the Russian army?
They looked at us and said, "Sri, I said, what? You're fine without a leg." "Oh, that's a leg, a leg." Well, in its own way, it's not the sky, but it's a leg. He's been sitting here for days too. What was I trying to say with that? They came in, looked around, asked who was there for what, and were told the reasons. "All right, guys, got it." And then they left.
These occupiers will soon be sent on their final meat assault. The fact that some of them are missing limbs doesn't concern anyone. Their commanders just use them as disposable cannon fodder. Some occupiers still believe the state will help them, so they complain to the Kremlin ombudsman about being denied medical care or receiving poor treatment. The number of such complaints has quadrupled in 2 years, from 459 to 1,976.
The applicant's husband, after receiving treatment at a frontline hospital, was sent to the Military Medical Commission to determine his fitness for military service. Upon arriving at the military unit to receive the order and referral to the Military Medical Commission, he was sent to the front line. Since May 2024, he has been listed as missing in action.
After being wounded or due to pre-existing health problems, not all soldiers are given enough time for full and proper rehabilitation. Sometimes a soldier is sent beyond the line despite doctors' recommendations to continue treatment and the need for rehabilitation. As a result, a serviceman ends up on the front line who is physically unable to carry out combat tasks.
But at least these ones went to the front on their own. And there are cases when Russian men only find out after the fact that their occupation has been changed.
Black recruiting, black recruiters, they've turned into slave traders. We basically have human trafficking going on, supplying people to the front.
Everyone, without exception, ends up in the crossfire. Cerebral palsy, mental illnesses, missing limbs. None of that matters. It's all useful for the Russian army. The local administrations, of course, know all about it. They even encourage and assist.
In my home village of Cherkasy, they got a guy from Siberia drunk. They married him off to an elderly woman of loose morals and low social responsibility. They sent him to the front where he died, and now they're claiming compensation as his wife, even though he had never even seen her in his life.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
A Russian soldier like this can be eliminated with the help of his commanders. The occupiers complain that unwanted SVO soldiers are often sent on suicide assaults. One of these roles during an assault is called a beacon among the military. The occupier is sent without a weapon or body armor to expose the firing positions of Ukrainian forces. You just run one way, and there's a blocking detachment behind you that won't let you go back. Your only chance to survive is to get wounded and be captured by the kakli, a derogatory term for Ukrainians. The occupiers admit not only to being eliminated by their commanders, but also to killing civilians. A Russian soldier recounted how his commander entered the wrong coordinates, which resulted in an artillery strike on a village. Many people died, including children. The soldier only found out about what happened after the administration of the so-called LNR complained to the command.
Basically, we mixed up the targets, those for Gorozhgrad and those for Uragan. The grid squares had the same name, and the idiot who was on duty at the command post just mixed them up, the captain. But what do I care? They give me the numbers for the flashlight, and I have to call the battalion commander. So he says, how do we write everyone off? It's fine. He says, 12 kids and 9 of them are from today.
Of course, the incident was hushed up, and on Russian television they reported that supposedly Ukrainian servicemen were in that village. And these are stories that have come to light just in the past few days. In reality, the situation is much worse, and with each passing day, it continues to deteriorate. The last leg of Valery Gerasimov's chair has broken, according to the Atesh movement, which cites information from officers in one of the Russian military groups. The Kremlin is very dissatisfied with the general's work and, to put it mildly, his less than truthful reports from the front.
Putin has given Gerasimov a deadline to capture Pokrovsk by mid-November. This order is the general's last chance to keep his position. Against the backdrop of this ultimatum, there has been a sharp escalation in the Pokrovsk direction, human wave assaults. The command is sending massive waves of personnel into suicidal attacks in order to fulfill the order at any cost.
Unremarkable and lacking charisma, Valery Gerasimov is the man to whom Putin owes his first presidential term. It was he who, while Moscow was preparing to check boxes on ballots, led the combat operations for the village of Komsomolskoye. This 15-day struggle became the key and final battle for the Russians in the Second Chechen War. Gerasimov delivered victory to candidate Putin, marching over the countless corpses of Russian soldiers and local residents.
The residents were allowed to leave the village, but they weren't allowed to go far. They were forced to stay for several days on the outskirts of the village, but in reality, they served as a human shield. In
2012, it was Gerasimov who presented the country's leadership with the formula for hybrid warfare. At that time, he insisted that it was necessary to move away from classical wars toward destabilization on the ground.
The path to this lies in the active use of the protest potential of the fifth column.
A little later, the Russians tested Gerasimov's formula first in Crimea and then in Donbass. According to Bellingcat investigators, it was Valery Gerasimov who, in 2014, initiated the deployment of regular Russian troops near Ukrainian Ilovaisk and the transfer of Russian military equipment to the separatists. It was from this equipment, by the way, that the Malaysian Boeing was shot down. Mute Gerasim, as the Grey Cardinal of the General Staff is called among themselves, has outlasted all his loud and flamboyant critics.
Everyone who doesn't provide us with ammunition and supplies will be eating it in hell. Damn it. We're short on ammunition by 70%. Shoigu. Gerasimov. Where are your supplies?
Prigozhin has been blown up. Strelkov Gherkin is rotting behind bars. After the scandal, it was thanks to Valery Gerasimov's efforts that the favorite of Russian Z patriots, General Popov, was sent there. Even Shoigu was carried out of the Ministry of Defense, but Mute Gerasim still remains in his chair. Although rumors of his dismissal have been actively spreading since last summer, and now, supposedly, there is actually some basis for them. If Gerasimov fails to capture Pokrovsk by mid-November, he will be replaced by Viktor Viktorovich Paznikir, who was born and raised not far from the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Not much is known about him. He was awarded the Order of Zhukov by a classified decree, and in February 2024 he received the rank of Colonel General.
It's hard to call this military leader a public figure. His name was first mentioned in the media after the start of the operation in Syria. The Lieutenant General held the position of First Deputy Chief of the Main Operational Directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces. His briefings were dedicated to the situation around Palmyra and Aleppo. Paznikir also spoke about the work of the Russian military police in the Middle East and criticized the presence of U.S. naval forces in the region. The Lieutenant General's statement about U.S. plans to develop a global missile defense system caused a major stir. At the Moscow Conference on International Security, Paznikir called Washington a likely adversary of Moscow. To overcome missile defense, Viktor Viktorovich proposed using the Sarmat and Avangard systems.
It is still unknown whether Gerasimov will be able to outsmart his adversaries again and hold on. Since the summer, the occupiers have been amassing troops in the Pokrovsk direction and probing for weak spots in the Ukrainian defense. On their side are Russia's vast resources, which they spare no expense to achieve their goals, and a huge number of fortune seekers enticed by contracts and the new status of hero. And in 2025, Pokrovsk could become an important and decisive battle, just like the Chechen village of Komsomolskoye once was.
These people are indeed my fellow countrymen, and all of them are now truly able to walk, do things. They could have had more children, thereby expanding their family. In short, they could have truly, meaningfully, and significantly benefited their fellow citizens.
More than 1 million losses in the Russian army since 2022. The cemeteries are overflowing, contract payments have been reduced, and commanders are stealing the funeral payouts. Over the past 2 years, the number of contract signings in the Russian Federation has dropped to a minimum. Pokrovsk has been under assault for a year now at the cost of enormous losses. So where do they find new people for Putin's war? A scheme for covert mobilization has been uncovered in Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense has resorted to extreme measures, sending young people to die.
We signed the contract on July 5th, 2025, under psychological pressure from Junior Lieutenant Dasha Dorzieva. Specifically, he intimidated us, saying that if we stayed on conscript service, we would be sent to Kursk. And in Kursk, if people, conscripts are sent there, only 70% return, while 30% die there.
Conscription is covert mobilization. Today in Russia, conscripts are becoming a significant force that the authorities are throwing into the so-called special military operation.
There are people from my draft, my friends, who were wounded, shell-shocked, or killed. They're hitting us with blue shrapnel.
Cases of forcing conscripts to sign military contracts continue. One of them was Andrei Smirnov.
The 50th Separate Railway Unit declares that they do not want to sign a military contract. If a signed contract appears, I declare that it was signed under psychological or physical pressure or through fraudulent means.
195,000 rubles were deposited into his bank card. It turned out that this was the first payment under a contract that, as it turned out, had been drawn up in his name. Smirnov claims that the document itself was handwritten and signed by someone else. Other young men are unable to withstand the psychological pressure from commanders, who persuade them to agree to go to war instead of returning home to their families.
He said that it turns out no one will be waiting for me at home. All my friends will disappear. Sometimes it feels like my parents will just send me off to work and no one will really look after me or truly care for me at all. It worries me that I won't be needed by anyone either and that I might end up feeling completely alone. I wonder if anyone will notice or care about what happens to me.
They are beaten, deprived of sleep, and cut off from contact with their loved ones. In some cases, those who refused were even shot at with air guns.
Contracts are signed for conscripts without telling them. They are then formally, as official contract soldiers, sent to war. I'm not saying this without evidence. This year, there was a big scandal in Chebarkul, which is near the Chelyabinsk region. In the Chelyabinsk region, there is a well-known military unit where the prosecutor's office itself, under pressure from relatives' appeals, concealed and admitted that there had been falsifications by the command to force conscripts to sign contracts.
Bringing in conscripts allows contract soldiers and mercenaries to be freed up for new offensives.
They're only 18 years old, they have no combat experience, they don't even have any real-life experience. How can they help at the front?
There is an unofficial plan in Russian military units to recruit contract soldiers from among the conscripts. We
have evidence of people being locked in overheated drying rooms and kept there for a long time until they agreed to sign a contract. People from Kuzbas told me that one conscript managed to resist such pressure and was able not to sign the contract. But at what cost? His femoral head was broken and he was discharged from the army early. So he didn't sign the contract, but he was left disabled. And yet, people consider this case a success. These are the kinds of successes we have.
The mother of another Russian conscript explained that her son, who was serving in the military, signed a contract for military service after he was pressured to do so by authorities.
He explained to me, saying, "Mom, I don't even understand myself how it happened. I never had any desire to sign a contract."
When he submitted a report refusing the contract, they didn't accept it and claimed that signing the contract was voluntary. In Primorsky Krai, when conscripts refuse to sign a contract, other servicemen are set against them, subjecting them to collective punishment.
A conscript was forced to sign a contract through coercion and psychological pressure. The child doesn't want to go, but they'll send him to the special military operation. The child is only 18 years old, and he signed it involuntarily. This coercion was against his will. He wasn't planning to and didn't want to sign that contract. They told him, "You have no choice, you'll sign it anyway."
The mother didn't know that her son had been sent to war. He thought he would end up in a guard unit, but he ended up in Mariupol.
We don't know where our son is now. At the moment, we have messages and screenshots with him, audio recordings and video recordings of conversations where he confirms that he signed the contract under pressure against his own will.
Currently, conscription into the Russian army is taking place in annexed Crimea.
You are proudly joining the honorable ranks of the defenders of our motherland.
Conscripts, both from Russia and from the occupied territories, are forced in the very first months of service to sign a military contract so that there is a legal basis to send them to war. In addition, law enforcement uses conscript soldiers in battalions to shoot down drones.
Bro, well, for example, we're serving as conscripts, right, basically? The conscript guys, yeah, I think 3 were killed and 16 wounded. Just conscripts. Those drones came in. And here too, they fly around pretty often, bro. And imagine, the guys are shooting down drones, yeah, and they don't even get paid, can you believe it? Even though they said, like, if you shoot down drones, you'll get paid well.
The number of yesterday's conscripts who become contract soldiers and are sent to war, according to human rights activists, is classified.
About 300,000 people are drafted for compulsory service each year, but even if a third of them sign a contract, that's about 100,000 new contracts. This is a kind of forced recruitment, and it goes on constantly.
The Russian Ministry of Defense, in order to fulfill Putin's orders, is patching up holes at the front with 18-year-old boys. But no one can help them avoid this. After all, Putin isn't even trying to stop the bloody slaughter.